That skill presents fractions. In this video, we are going to talk about a few common concepts related to fractions. A fraction is said to be in its lowest terms when the greatest common factor, or the GCF, between its numerator and denominator is 1. Consider the fraction 3/5. The GCF of 3 and 5 is 1, and therefore we say this fraction is already in its lowest terms. But if you look at the fraction 10/20, this isn't in its lowest terms because the greatest common factor between 10 and 20 is not 1, it's 10. So to get to its lowest form, you want to divide the numerator and the denominator with the GCF. And 10 divided by 10 is 1 on the top, 20 divided by 10 is 2 on the bottom. And this is the lowest form of the fraction 10/20. I have to tell you here that if you couldn't find the GCF, you could start dividing the numerator and the denominator with any common factor between them, as long as it's not 1. Because if you divide with 1, 1 is a common factor between every two integers. But if you divide with 1, a number divided by 1 is the same number. Therefore, you don't change the fraction. The goal is to reduce these two numbers down. Keep doing that until you can do that no more. So keep dividing with common factors until there's no common factor other than 1. So starting with that same fraction 10/20, you could have said, okay, I'm going to divide this with 2 and this with 2. Fair enough. 2 is a common factor between 10 and 20, although not the greatest common factor. And then 10 divided by 2 is 5, 20 divided by 2 is 10, so you end up with this fraction 5/10. But hang on, there's still a common factor between 5 and 10, and that's larger than 1, and that is 5. 5 is a factor of itself, and 5 is a factor of 10, and therefore this simplifies to 1 on the top, and this one is 2 on the bottom. Eventually, you still get to the simplest form, just that you needed one extra step in between because you didn't pick the greatest common factor to divide the numerator and the denominator. Similarly, if you wanted to, let's say, reduce or simplify the fraction to its lowest terms, 32/40, you have several options. You could either divide 32 with 8 and 40 with 8 because that's the GCF of these two numbers. So you have straight away a 4 on the top and a 5 on the bottom. And the GCF of 4 and 5 is 1. Therefore, this is the fraction into its lowest terms. But what if you picked a different number to divide other than 8? Would you still end up getting 4/5? Let's find that out. So let's start with 32/40 and let's try and divide this with 2 and this with 2. So that takes us to 32 divided by 2 is 16 on the top, 40 divided with 2 is 20 on the bottom. And let's just keep dividing with 2, 16 with 2 and 20 with 2. So we have an 8 on the top and a 10 on the bottom. Divide with 2 again. 4 on the top and a 5 on the bottom. And that is the simplest form because there's no common factor between 4 and 5 other than 1. So we get the same answer, but we needed more steps because we didn't divide with the greatest common factor. There's something called a reciprocal, also known as the multiplicative inverse, and that can be of any number. Doesn't necessarily have to be a fraction. You think of a number, let's say 3, its multiplicative inverse is that number that multiplies with 3 and the answer is 1. Now 3 times what is 1? This is 1/3, right? 3 times 1/3 is 1. So we say 1/3 is the multiplicative inverse of 3, or 3 is the multiplicative inverse or the reciprocal of 1/3. Similarly, the reciprocal of 2 is 1/2 because 2 times 1/2 is 1. And to find the reciprocal of the multiplicative inverse of a fraction, let's say 3/7. You want to find that number or fraction that multiplies with 3/7 and you get a 1. And obviously to get a 1, you want to have a 7 on the top so that the 7 and the 7 cross off, and similarly you want to have a 3 on the bottom. So as you can see, a fraction and its multiplicative inverse have their numerators and denominators flipped over. So we could say the reciprocal of, let's say, 5/8 is 8/5, of 3/4 is 4/3, and so on. Given a mixed number, like let's say 5 and 3/7, how do you find the closest whole number to this number? Now if you think about the number line, this number out here, 5 and 3/7, is between 5 and 6. So you want to look at this fraction part, 3/7. If this is more than half, so is this more than half? Is this more than 1/2? If it is yes, then you want to round this up to 6. The nearest whole number is 6. On the other hand, if the answer to this question is no, then you want to round it down to 5. And if it's exactly equal to 1/2, 3/7, just in case if it were to be, then it would still go on the 6 side. So how do you figure out if 3/7 is less than 1/2 or more than 1/2? Now the fraction equivalent to 1/2 with a 3 on the top is 3/6. If you multiply the numerator and the denominator with 3, you get 1 times 3, that's 3, and 2 times 3, that's 6. So the question is between 3/7 and 3/6, which is more? And to answer that question, you look at the denominators. The numerators are the same, they're 3. So would you divide 3 with 7 to get a larger answer, or would you divide 3 with 6 to get a larger answer? And obviously, lesser the divisor, larger is the answer. So we could easily say that 3/6 is more than 3/7. Dividing 3 with 6, which is smaller than 7, will give you a larger answer. And therefore, 3/7 is less than 1/2, that's equivalent to 3/6, which means 3/7, if this is 5 and 1/2, if this is where you have 5 and 1/2 on the number line, 3/7 is to its left. Less means left, and therefore this mixed number out here rounds to the whole number 5.